What kind of person tries to sell land that isn't theirs right out from under someone's home? The kind who thinks they can bully their way through life. That's who. My name is Caleb, and I've lived in my cabin on the edge of Willow Creek for 20 years, a quiet patch of Montana where the mountains hum with secrets and the stars feel close enough to touch. It's not much, just a small cabin, a vegetable garden, and a view of the valley that makes your heart ache with its beauty. I built this life with my own hands, log by log, after leaving a city job that chewed up my soul. This land, all 50 acres of it, was my sanctuary, legally mine through a deed as solid as the granite peaks around me. But then the HOA came, a pack of wolves in pressed suits, led by a woman named Karen who thought she could carve up 2,000 acres of protected wilderness, including my land, for a luxury resort. They didn't expect me to fight back. They didn't expect me to win. It started on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells of pine and frost clings to the grass. I was splitting firewood when I heard the rumble of engines. 3 black SUVs rolled up my dirt driveway, kicking up dust like a storm cloud. Karen stepped out first, her heels sinking into the earth, her blonde hair pulled tight in a bun that screamed control. She was all sharp edges, lipstick too red, smile too forced, a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Behind her, 4 men in suits fanned out, their eyes scanning my property like vultures circling a kill. "Caleb Morrow," she called, her voice slicing through the quiet. I set my axe down, slow and deliberate, and nodded. She didn't waste time. "This land is part of a new development plan. Willow Creek Estates. We're offering you a buyout. Generous, considering the circumstances." I asked what circumstances. She smirked, handing me a glossy pamphlet with renderings of condos and golf courses. "This valley's been rezoned. The HOA has authority over the entire 2,000 acres. Your cabin's in the way." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was breathtaking. My land wasn't part of any HOA. I'd bought it free and clear from an old rancher. No covenants, no restrictions. The deed was locked in my safe, notarized and untouchable. I told her as much, but Karen's eyes narrowed, like a predator sizing up prey. "You'll find we're quite persuasive," she said, and one of her suits stepped forward, a burly guy with a scar across his knuckles. He didn't say anything, but his presence was a threat, heavy as the axe in my hand. They left after that, but not before Karen tossed a letter on my porch, stamped with the HOA's logo. It demanded I vacate within 30 days or face legal consequences. I watched their SUVs disappear, the dust settling like a bad omen. That night, I dug out my deed and spread it on the kitchen table, the paper worn but unyielding. They weren't just coming for my land. They were coming for my life. The next week, signs went up along the valley's edge. Willow Creek Estates. Luxury living in Montana's heart. They were planted on public land, technically, but close enough to my property to make my blood boil. I started asking around town. Willow Creek was small, the kind of place where everyone knew your business. At the diner, Old Man Jenkins, who'd sold me my firewood for years, leaned over his coffee and whispered, "Heard the HOA's got big money behind him. Some developer out of California. They're saying the whole valley's going to be condos by next year." I asked if anyone else got letters. He nodded. A few folks up on Pine Ridge got him too. Most are scared. Karen's been making threats. Says she'll sue him into the ground if they don't sell. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. Karen and her HOA were a plague, sweeping through the valley, preying on people too tired or too broke to fight. I wasn't tired, and I sure as hell wasn't broke. Back in my city days, I'd been a lawyer, not the flashy kind, but the kind who read fine print and knew how to make it bleed. I'd left that life behind, but the skills hadn't rusted. I drove to the county courthouse, a squat brick building that smelled of dust and bureaucracy, and pulled every record I could on Willow Creek. The HOA's claim was flimsy, based on a vague rezoning ordinance that hadn't even passed yet. They were banking on intimidation, hoping no one would dig deeper. But I did. I found a loophole, a tiny crack in their armor. The HOA's own bylaws, filed with the state, gave voting rights to every property owner in the valley, whether they'd signed onto the HOA or not. And Karen's crew had been sloppy. They'd never registered half the properties they claimed, including mine. That night, I sat by my fire, the deed in one hand, a beer in the other, and started a plan. If Karen thought she could steamroll me, she was about to meet a wall. I wasn't just going to save my land. I was going to turn her game against her. The HOA had power because people feared it. But fear works both ways. I'd make them afraid. I'd make them regret ever stepping foot in Willow Creek. The valley buzzed with whispers, but no one dared speak too loudly. Karen's HOA had sunk its claws deep, and fear hung over Willow Creek like a fog. I started visiting neighbors, knocking on doors from Pine Ridge to the river flats, carrying a thermos of coffee and a stack of photocopied records. Most folks were wary, their eyes darting like they expected Karen to pop out of the bushes. But when I showed them the HOA's bylaws, the loophole I'd found, their faces changed. Hope crept in, fragile but real. "You're saying we can fight this?" asked Maria, a single mom who ran a small goat farm. Her land was slated for a golf course, her home for demolition. I nodded. "We don't just fight. We take control." By the end of the week, I'd rallied a dozen property owners, a ragtag coalition of ranchers, retirees, and misfits like me, all bound by one thing. We weren't going to let Karen win. The twist came on a rainy Tuesday when I got a call from Jenkins at the diner. His voice was low, urgent. "Caleb, you need to see this. Meet me at the old mill." I drove out, wipers slapping against the drizzle, and found him standing under the mill's sagging roof, holding a manila envelope. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough. Karen in her suits meeting with a man in a slick city suit, shaking hands in front of a bulldozer. Jenkins pointed to the man. "That's Victor Crane, big shot developer from LA, been buying up land for years. Word is he's the money behind the HOA." The photos weren't just a smoking gun, they were dynamite. They showed Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a puppet, dancing on crane strings. It lit a fire in me, but it also broke something. I thought this was just greed. Now it felt personal, like they were spitting on the valley's soul. Armed with the photos and the bylaws, I called a meeting at the community center, a drafty barn that hadn't seen a crowd in years. 20 people showed up, more than I'd hoped. Maria brought her neighbor, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Roy who'd lost half his hearing, but none of his fight. Jenkins brought the photos, and I brought a plan. The HOA's bylaws let us vote to dissolve it, but only if we controlled the majority of the valley's properties. Karen's crew thought they had the numbers, but they'd lied on their filings, claiming land that wasn't theirs. If we could prove it, we could call a vote and win. The room crackled with energy, voices rising, fists pounding tables. For the first time, we weren't just scared. We were angry. But Karen wasn't idle. The next morning, I woke to find my mailbox stuffed with a new letter, this one from a law firm in Helena. It accused me of interfering with lawful development and threatened a $100,000 lawsuit if I didn't back off. I wasn't surprised. Karen played dirty, but the timing stung. That afternoon, Maria called, her voice shaking. "They came to my farm, Caleb, said if I don't sell, they'll report me for code violations. I can't afford a lawyer." Others got similar threats. Roy found surveyors on his land, claiming it was condemned for a drainage ditch. The HOA was tightening the screws, and I could feel the group's resolve waver. I had to act fast. I spent nights poring over county records, cross-referencing deeds with the HOA's claims. Their filings were a house of cards. Half the properties they claimed were either public land or owned by people like me outside their jurisdiction. I filed a formal complaint with the state, citing fraud and misrepresentation. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it bought us time. Meanwhile, I worked on a vote. The bylaws required a public meeting, and I knew Karen would fight it tooth and nail. I spread the word through back channels, notes passed at the diner, whispers at the gas station. We set the date for 2 weeks out at the community center. If we could get enough owners there, we could seize control of the HOA and shut it down for good. But Karen had eyes everywhere. A day before the meeting, I found my truck's tires slashed, the words "back off" spray painted on my barn. I didn't tell the others. They were scared enough. Instead, I called Jenkins and asked him to spread a rumor. Caleb Morrow was giving up, selling his land, moving out. It was a lie, but I needed Karen to lower her guard. She took the bait. The next day, her SUVs rolled through town, her smirk wider than ever. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what was coming. The community center was packed, standing room only, the air thick with tension and the smell of old wood. 50 property owners crammed into the barn, their faces a mix of fear, anger, and hope. I stood at the front, a folding table covered with maps and deeds, my heart pounding like a war drum. Karen and her suits arrived late, strutting in like they owned the place. She wore a tailored blazer, her clipboard swapped for a tablet that glowed with authority. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, the room felt like a tinderbox, one spark from exploding. "This meeting's a farce," she snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "You have no standing to call a vote." I held up the HOA's bylaws, the loophole circled in red. Says here every property owner gets a say, and we're here to vote. The crowd roared a raw, defiant sound that made her flinch. Karen recovered fast, her smile venomous. "You think you can outmaneuver us? We have the law on our side." She waved her tablet, claiming the rezoning was finalized, that the state backed her. But I'd done my homework. I slid a stack of papers across the table. County records, deeds, and a copy of my complaint to the state. "You filed false claims on half this valley," I said. "Public land, private land, doesn't matter. You don't own it." The room erupted, voices shouting, fists raised. Karen's suits shifted, uneasy, but she didn't back down. She leaned in, her voice low and cold. "You're a small man, Caleb. You'll lose everything." That's when Maria stood, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. "You threatened my kid's home. We're not scared anymore." Roy followed, then Jenkins, then others, a chorus of defiance that drowned her out. The vote was chaos. Karen's team tried to stall, demanding recounts, questioning signatures. But the bylaws were clear, and the numbers weren't on their side. We had 32 votes to their 18. The HOA was ours. Karen's face twisted, her composure cracking like thin ice. She stormed out, her suits trailing, but not before hissing, "This isn't over." The room cheered, but I knew she was right. This was just the beginning. That night, we celebrated at the diner, coffee and pie passed around like war spoils. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was plotting her next move. She struck 2 days later. A cease and desist order hit every property owner who'd voted, claiming we'd violated state law by usurping the HOA. It was a bluff, but a good one. Legal jargon designed to scare. Maria panicked, thinking she'd lose her farm. Roy wanted to drive to Karen's office with his shotgun. I calmed them down, promising we'd fight this together. I dug deeper into the HOA's records, and that's when I found it. Their funding. Victor Crane's company had funneled millions through shell corporations, buying influence in the county. But they'd made a mistake. The HOA's bank accounts were tied to properties they didn't legally control, including their own homes. The idea hit me like lightning. If we controlled the HOA, we controlled its assets. And Karen's crew, in their arrogance, had registered their personal homes under the HOA to dodge taxes. I checked the bylaws again. The board could sell any property deemed non-compliant. It was a long shot, but if we could prove their homes were tied to the HOA's fraudulent claims, we could turn their own rules against them. I called an emergency board meeting, now led by me, Maria, and Jenkins. We voted to declare Karen's properties non-compliant, citing their own forged filings. It was legal, barely, but it was enough. I filed the paperwork to sell their homes. 5 pristine estates in a gated community 20 miles away, where Karen and her suits lived like kings. The fallout was immediate. Karen's lawyer called, screaming about lawsuits, but I had the deeds, the bylaws, and the state's fraud investigation on my side. The sales went through, the profits redirected to a trust for Willow Creek's residents. Karen's empire began to crumble, her allies abandoning her, as the money dried up. But she wasn't done. She showed up at my cabin one last time, alone, her eyes wild with rage. "You think you're clever?" she spat. "You'll pay for this." I looked her in the eye, my axe resting against the porch. "You came from my home. I took yours. We're even." She left without another word, her heels clicking into the dusk. The valley exhaled, like it had been holding its breath for months. Karen's defeat was the talk of Willow Creek, whispered over fences and shouted in the diner. The HOA was dissolved, its accounts frozen pending the state's investigation into Victor Crane's dealings. The signs for Willow Creek estates came down, replaced by wildflowers that seemed to bloom brighter, as if the land itself was celebrating. But victory didn't erase the scars. Maria's farm was safe, but she still woke up at night, checking her windows for SUVs. Roy polished his shotgun more than he needed to. And me? I couldn't walk my land without seeing Karen smirk, her threat echoing like a ghost. We'd won, but the fight had cost us something: trust, maybe, or the illusion that a place like this could stay untouched. I spent weeks tying up loose ends, meeting with lawyers to ensure the sales of Karen's properties stuck. The money from the trust went to good use: repairs for Maria's barn, a new roof for Jenkins' house, a scholarship fund for kids in the valley. It wasn't about revenge, it was about rebuilding. But the weight of it all settled on me, heavy as the winter snows that were starting to dust the peaks. I'd fought for my home, for all our homes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line. Selling their houses wasn't just justice. It was a kind of vengeance, sharp and cold. I wondered if I'd become the thing I hated. One morning, as I chopped wood, a truck pulled up. It was Jenkins, his face grim. "Found something you need to see," he said, handing me a USB drive. Back at my cabin, I plugged it into my old laptop. It was a video, shaky but clear, from a security camera at the old mill. It showed Karen and Victor Crane arguing in hushed tones, then Karen slipping him an envelope. The timestamp was a week before the HOA's first letter arrived. Jenkins leaned over my shoulder. "That's a bribe." She was paying off the county planner. The video was a bombshell, proof that Karen's scheme went deeper than we'd thought. I sent it to the state investigator anonymously. Within days, Crane's company was under scrutiny, and Karen's name was all over the news, tied to fraud and corruption. The valley started to heal, but it wasn't the same. People smiled more, but their eyes were sharper, watching for the next threat. I walked my land each evening, the familiar crunch of gravel under my boots grounding me. One night, Maria stopped by with a basket of eggs from her hens. "You gave us our lives back," she said, her voice soft but fierce. I shook my head. "We did it together." She hugged me, and for the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. The fight had changed us, but it had also bound us. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now shared meals, swapped tools, checked in on each other. Willow Creek wasn't just a place anymore. It was a family. I thought about Karen sometimes, wondering where she'd gone. Her house was sold, her name disgraced. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. She tried to take everything: our homes, our peace, our future. We'd fought back, not with guns or fists, but with paper and grit and the stubborn will to protect what was ours. The valley was safe for now, but I knew the world outside was always waiting, hungry for places like this. I kept my deed close, my axe sharp, and my eyes on the horizon. Winter came early to Willow Creek, blanketing the valley in snow that muffled the world's noise. My cabin felt warmer, not just from the fire, but from the quiet certainty that it was still mine. The fight with the HOA had left marks: legal fees, sleepless nights, a faint paranoia every time a car slowed on the road. But it had also given us something new, a community forged in fire. We weren't just neighbors anymore, we were survivors. Maria started a co-op for local farmers. Roy taught kids how to fish in the creek, and Jenkins turned the diner into a hub for town meetings. I helped where I could, fixing fences, drafting letters to the county to protect the valley's status as a conservation zone. But the real work was in remembering why we'd fought. not just for land, but for the life it held. One afternoon, as I shoveled snow from my porch, a letter arrived. No HOA logo this time, just a plain envelope with a Helena postmark. Inside was a handwritten note from Karen. No return address, no signature, just her sharp, angular scrawl. You think you won, but you've only delayed the inevitable. People like me always come back. I burned the note in my fireplace, watching the flames curl around her words. It wasn't a threat that scared me. It was the truth in it. The world was full of Karens, people who saw places like Willow Creek as nothing but dollar signs. I'd beaten one, but others would come. The thought didn't defeat me. It made me sharper, more determined. I started teaching the others what I'd learned, how to read deeds, file complaints, spot loopholes. Knowledge was our best weapon, stronger than any axe. Maria took to it like she was born for it. Her farm now a model of self-sufficiency. Roy, gruff as ever, started a neighborhood watch, less about crime and more about keeping developers at bay. We weren't just protecting our land. We were building a legacy, a way to keep Willow Creek free for the next generation. The valley had always been beautiful, but now it felt sacred, every tree and stone a testament to what we'd saved. One spring day, as the snow melted and the creek swelled, I walked to the edge of my property, where the old HOA signs had once stood. Wildflowers covered the ground now, a riot of color against the green. I thought about the video, the bribes, the way Karen's empire had collapsed under its own weight. Justice wasn't always clean, but it was ours. I'd sold their homes not out of spite, but to protect what mattered. The money from those sales was a shield, a way to keep the valley whole. I didn't regret it, but I carried it, a weight I'd bear for the rest of my days. The years passed, and Willow Creek grew stronger. The co-op thrived, drawing families from nearby towns who wanted a piece of our life. Simple, rooted, free. We built a small library, stocked with books on law and land rights. A quiet promise to stay vigilant. I aged, my hands rougher, my hair grayer, but the cabin held steady, its logs weathered but unbowed. Every so often, I'd hear rumors of new developers sniffing around, but they never got far. The valley had teeth now, and we weren't afraid to bite. One summer, a young couple bought the old mill, turning it into a workshop for local artisans. They invited me over, show me the beams where Jenkins had found the photos that changed everything. Heard you're the guy who saved this place, the husband said, his eyes bright with admiration. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the hero label. It wasn't just me, I said. It was all of us. But they insisted on a toast, raising glasses of homemade cider to Willow Creek, to freedom, to fighting the good fight. I drank, and for a moment I saw the valley through their eyes, a place worth saving, worth building. Karen's name faded, a ghost story told to scare new residents into checking their deeds. But her shadow lingered in me, a reminder of how close we'd come to losing it all. I didn't hate her anymore, I pitied her. She'd gambled everything on power and lost, while we'd bet on each other and won. That was the difference. That was the lesson. I wrote it down one night, a letter to the future tucked into the library's collection. This land is yours, I wrote, but only if you fight for it. Never trust a suit with a clipboard. On my 60th birthday, the valley threw a party at the community center. Maria baked a cake, Roy played his old guitar, and Jenkins told stories that got wilder with every beer. Kids ran through the barn, their laughter echoing off the rafters. I looked around at the faces I'd fought beside, the land we'd saved, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not the quiet of an empty valley, but the fullness of a life shared. We weren't perfect. Fights still broke out over fence lines or water rights, but we solved them together, face to face, no clipboards needed. As the sun set, painting the mountains gold, I stepped outside and walked to the creek. The water was clear, cold, eternal. I thought about my cabin, the deed still locked in its safe, the axe still sharp by the door. I thought about Karen, about Crane, about the battles we'd fought and the ones still to come. Willow Creek wasn't just a place. It was a promise, one we'd keep as long as we stood together. I dipped my hand in the creek, let the water slip through my fingers, and smiled. We'd built something here, something worth more than any resort. We'd built a home.